Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ashley and this is Faithful Artos. So, in today's video, as you can tell from the title and the thumbnail, I am going to be debunking, discussing some of the crazy myths that surround rats, because as we know, the public is genuinely really misinformed about our lovely little critters. I don't know why I said critters, that's a bit weird. I am also testing out filming on the back camera of my phone because my actual camera still isn't fixed yet. And I'm just wondering if this is better, but it's very different from me because I can't really see myself, obviously, because I can't see sort of like, you know, the back of my phone and everything. So we'll just get into it, and if this is really awkward when I watch the footage back, then we'll have to do something else. I can see there's a little robin on my balcony, and it's very cute. He visits us often. Myth number one. I've had a surprising amount of people coming to tell me rats can't fart. They can fart like every other animal, every other mammal, and it doesn't smell nice. Just like your farts don't smell nice. Apparently, some people think they don't have bladders or bladder control. This is a very common one that I get people telling me when I go out in public and say that I have rats. They say, well, don't they not have a bladder? And I'm like, what do you mean? You think rats don't have a bladder? No, they don't just piss everywhere because they can't stop it. They just scent mark like every other animal, just like your dog when he's on a walk and he's pissing on the telephone poles. Like, that's just scent marking. Like, that's not your dog being incontinent. And it's pretty normal for mammals to do it. We don't do it anymore, but it's pretty normal. Scent marking and marking territory is a normal thing. And yes, my rats have bladder control. They're litter trained. Rats give you the plague. Now, interestingly, I found a study. I think I'm going to try and find it again so I can link it for you or show pictures of it. But this study found that the fastness in which the plague spread meant that it was impossible for rats to be the main carrier and transmissions of the plague. The rat to human, from, you know, the fleas, etc., transmission of the plague is much slower than a human transmission of the plague, and the speed with which the plague transferred itself all around the country and the globe, it's statistically impossible for that cause to be rats. And I think that's been proven without a doubt in the past couple of years. Sorry, I just spat. Like, we've just been living through almost 2 years now of a pandemic, and you still think that rats are the biggest cause of disease transference. I think you need to not even read a history book, like, just go look at the news. Because it's not rats, it's people. Yeah, we're the gross ones. Rats are big mice. While rats and mice are similar, they're not the same. And interestingly, there's quite a few species of rats. So the rats that we own as pets are Rattus norveicus domestica, which just means domesticated Rattus Norway rats. There's also the black rat, and there is roof rats. I think those are only really in America though. And there's a few other sort of more different types of rats, like the Gambian pouched rat, which they use to detect landmines in Africa. Red-eyed rats are evil. Now, this is my quorum. This little doofus couldn't do anything to hurt you. Like, all he does is nap. And I don't know where this sort of like red-eyed myth comes from. It's very interesting. I didn't particularly like red eyes before I got quorum, and I think it was down to this myth sort of being in my, you know, brain. But I didn't like red-eyed rats. And then when I went to the breeder and it was our turn to pick the rats, quorum was there, and he had also there's two Siamese. So we were picking a Siamese, a Burmese, and a Wheaton. And there were two Siamese there. There was quorum, and there was another one, and this little boy was black-eyed Siamese. And I looked at quorum with his red eyes, and I said, no, this is the one. And Adam, my boyfriend, was like, are you sure? I'm like, yeah, like, look how cute his red eyes are. And from that day on, I was a changed woman. However, I do think this myth is very pervasive, even in rat communities. But red-eyed rats aren't more evil. They're a bit more blind than other rats, so sometimes they can be a bit more bitey, but that's just because they don't know what's going on. Because rats have poor eyesight in general, but red-eyed rats have worse eyesight. If you know this is the next myth. If you know your dog or cat really well, you can let them interact with your rats. Well, you can, but that doesn't mean that you should. And interspecies interaction, specifically with prey and predator species, is just the worst idea you could ever have. Because yes, you might trust your dog, but at the end of the day, your dog isn't a robot. Your dog is a living being with thoughts and feelings. And if your dog feels in any way threatened by a rat, which in your head you wouldn't think that the rat is threatening, but the dog might be scared. And you know what scared dogs do, they bite. And don't put your pet in that position don't put your pets in that position. And rat bites are very painful. People who use live feeder rats for reptiles are also fucking dumb, because a rat can injure a snake pretty badly, and that's why in the UK people don't live feed, because rats can hurt other animals that even are a predator to them, and it's just not worth it. Like, those internet points just aren't worth it to put your animals in that sort of position. Either one, where they're in danger, or two, where they're getting emotionally stressed out, or just because then it'll be on them. If anything happens, you're going to blame them and you're going to hold a grudge, and that's not fair, because they're just following their instincts. So don't do it. Like, if I see anyone doing it, I'm always like, what are you doing? Like, you're a crazy person. The next one is funny. Bioactive bases are unsanitary because bedding should be changed weekly. One, bedding shouldn't be changed weekly. If you're cleaning out weekly, either one, you're using the wrong type of bedding. Two, you're over cleaning. And three, you're wasting your time. If you have a decent amount of it and your rats are litter training and you're also changing out the fabric items on the cage, you don't need to change out your substrate for at least a month. You just don't. Like, you just don't need to do that. It's wasteful. Selfishly, it's wasteful money-wise. It's also just wasting time. And they don't need it. And with a bioactive base, it doesn't need to be changed out, because a true bioactive base, not just a soil base, a bioactive base has cleanup crew bugs in there to dispose of the waste to make it clean. So no, in fact, it's not. Maybe the person who thinks this thinks it's just soil, but it's not. There's bugs in there too that eat the rat poop that falls in. But even when using a bioactive base, most rat owners will have a litter tray as well that will collect most of the waste. So it's not like, just use your common sense, please. Like, I say common sense, it's not that common, is it? This is a good one. This is a good one, I think, to talk about a lot. So this one says that the carrier method of introduction is cruel. Now, I can see why you would think that. However, I personally think that prolonging the stress of introductions is more cruel, and also putting rats in a situation where they're more likely to be stressed out and more likely to get in fights and more likely to be injured is more cruel than just having them in a small space for a couple of days. Because with the carrier method, the amount of injuries and the severity of injuries that rats get during scuffles in the carrier method is so much smaller than the severity and the amount of injuries that you get in another method, such as neutral territory, which works for some rats, but most rats it doesn't work for. And some of the other methods, like swapping out items, stresses rats out to no end and causes more frustration and more fights when they end up meeting each other, so it's not worth it in that regard. And then I also have to think about the fact that it's going to be a stressful situation no matter what method you use, but some methods are more stressful and some methods are more dangerous, and you've got to sort of think about it logically, that do you want your rats stressed out for weeks on end, or do you want them stressed out maybe for a couple of days? And I personally think it's much more cruel to put them in a prolonged amount of stress, because stress with rats can cause them to get ill, and if you're prolonging the stress when you don't need to, there's something wrong with you. And I think not using the carrier method when it's the best method to use is cruel, because the carrier method is very, very successful at bonding rats. It's very successful at allowing them to sort out their hierarchy, so there is no fights. And in most cases, there's only tending to be a little bit of scuffling during the first stages, the first few hours of each stage, and after that, they don't care. And I just think, personally, that if you're going to ignore the years and years and years, the decades of experienced rat owners' advice on this, you're stupid. Mixes are not as nutritionally sound as blocks. While this can be true if you're not making a mix to meet a rat's need, or if you're using just a pre-made store-bought mix, in most cases, not rat rations, but in general, yes, those aren't nutritionally sound. However, once you have a nutritionally sound mix, which is very easy to make, I have a whole video on my channel about it if you want to go and check it out, but you've got to think about when you're feeding animals, not just is it nutritionally sound, is it enriching? Is this how they would eat naturally? And blocks, lab blocks or pellets or nuggets, whatever you call it in your country, does not give a rat that. There is no variety, and most of the time these store-bought lab blocks, nuggets, etc. are also not nutritionally sound. So what's the point? My rats get a mix. 1 second, I can even show it to you. This is the mix that my boys get, and it's nutritious and varied and so much more enriching for them to eat. I have to de-shell the seeds and the husks of the grains, and mixes are just better. They just are. They are more easily adaptable to any specific needs of your group. They're easily adaptable for giving them variety and different sorts of food. So every time I make a mix, I try to use a different ingredient in each section just to give my rats variety so they don't get bored. And all of this stuff, mixes are the best way to feed your rat. And I have a whole video about it, as I said, so I won't go into much more detail about it now. Okay, so I'm going to do a couple more, and then I'm going to finish this, and then I'm going to come back to these suggestions that I got, and I'm going to make a second video just so this isn't too long. The next one is citrus fruit is bad. Now, the reason why people don't think citrus fruit is appropriate for rats and other rodents is because of the D-limonene that is in citrus fruits, specifically oranges and, that sort of stuff. Now, this can cause problems to your rats, but they have to have drank or consumed such a large quantity that in a very short space of time, that a little rat just won't do if you're giving them a small piece of orange or a little sip of orange juice. It is specifically for male rats because of enzymes and things going on and specific hormones that male rats have. It can be damaging, but it has to be in such ginormous amounts that just aren't possible for a rat to have been drinking, so you don't have to worry about that one. The next myth is you can treat mites with olive oil, coconut oil and a bath. The answer is no, the fuck you cannot. So 1, mites on rats are invisible to the naked eye. The only way you can tell if your rats have mites is the little scratches they will be causing themselves, specifically on the back of their neck. If they're looking a little bit scruffy, if they're just feeling a little bit agitated, treat them for mites. However, coconut oil and olive oil are not going to be getting those mites off, because mites are invisible to the naked eye. They are very small, and they always are living on rats. They're always present on rats in very small numbers, and when a rat gets stressed or unwell, this can lower the immune system, so then the mites sort of grow a bigger colony, and this obviously means there's more problems for the rats. So this doesn't work because they're way too small to be affected by these things. Plus, mites are usually stress-induced, and if you're putting your rat in a bath, which is stressful as fuck and something you should never do, it's not going to work, and it's likely going to make your mites worse. What you need is a ivermectin treatment. In different countries, they go under different names. In the UK, the two main ones are a B4 spot on, or you can use harcomectin, which was made for pigeons, however is perfectly acceptable to use with rats, and also is more cost effective if you have a large group of rats or you're treating for mites very often. So yeah, no, that will not solve your problem. It just won't. And the last myth that we're going to finish on is, if you don't want rats anymore, you can keep the last one alive until it passes. And the answer is no. You cannot, because rats are not lone animals. They will get more sick and more depressed. They won't cope on their own, especially if they're older. If they're getting to being that sort of age, being alone is actually worse for them because, you know, they're more fragile medically. And so being alone is going to put them under exorbitant amounts of stress and loneliness that is just not right. If you don't want to keep rats anymore, the best thing you can do is, when they're starting to get old and you have just 2 remaining, is to rehome them together so they're not alone. They don't have to go through losing a cage mate as well as moving house. But if it's unexpected and you're left with one and you don't want to keep rats anymore, the only option you have is to rehome them. You cannot just keep them alone. End of story. Never. No. Don't do it. Don't do it. And if they are so old and frail that you think moving them would be irresponsible, then you need to start thinking about quality of life. Because if you won't move them and they won't go in with other rats, their quality of life is very, very low. And that is something you need to be thinking about in these situations, I think. And if their quality of life is so bad that you won't move them or get them other rats to be with, then their quality of life is at that point where you have to make that tough call and let them go. Now, it's very sad and it does sound very kind of dramatic, but it's true. So yeah, that's the last myth that I'm going to do for now. I will be making a second one of these videos, so if you have other myths you want me to include, do comment them down below or send me them on my Instagram. My Instagram is faithfulrattos. You'll be able to find me over there. And yeah, so that's it from me today. I don't know what the next video will be on my channel. I do want to make a Christmas video, but I'm not 100% sure on when or what it will be. So just keep your eyes peeled. Please do subscribe and leave me a comment if you thought any of these were ridiculous. And I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.